My name is Eleanor Hayes, and this is the story of how my own children turned my bedroom into their dog's room before I had even moved out. If someone had told me that the children I raised with my own hands would one day treat me like an inconvenience, I would have laughed. I gave them everything. After my husband died, I worked 2 jobs, sold my jewelry to keep food on the table, and never once let them see me cry. I wasn't rich, but they never went without. I truly believed that one day when I grew old, my children would remember all the sacrifices I made. Instead, they started counting the days until I was gone. It began after I broke my hip. My son David insisted it wasn't safe for me to live alone anymore. "Just stay with us for a few weeks while you recover," he said. "We'll help you get back on your feet." I was hesitant because I loved my little house. Every wall held a memory of my late husband. Every flower in the garden had been planted together. But David sounded so caring that I packed a small suitcase and agreed. The first week was wonderful. My granddaughter brought me tea every morning. David asked how I was feeling. His wife smiled at me over dinner. I remember lying in bed thinking, maybe growing old isn't so frightening after all. Then, little things began to change. Conversations stopped whenever I entered the room. David kept asking strange questions about my house, my savings, and whether I'd ever thought about downsizing permanently. His wife started referring to my home as the property. It felt less like concern and more like they were planning a future that no longer included me. One afternoon, while David thought I was asleep, I overheard him laughing with his wife in the kitchen. "She'll never go back," she said. "We'll have the house on the market before Christmas," David replied. They both laughed. I told myself I must have misunderstood. I wanted to believe I had misunderstood. A few days later, I returned to my house, unexpectedly because I'd forgotten my medication. I unlocked the front door with my spare key and immediately noticed muddy paw prints all over the hallway. Confused, I followed them toward my bedroom. The door was open. I froze. My floral curtains were gone. My family photographs had been stacked in a cardboard box. My husband's handmade oak bed had been pushed against the wall. In the center of the room sat an enormous luxury dog bed, surrounded by chew toys, food bowls, and a giant sign that read, "Charlie's Room." Charlie, their golden retriever, my bedroom, the room where my husband had taken his last breath, had already become the dog's bedroom. And I hadn't even moved out. I stood there, unable to breathe. The walls still had the faint outlines where my wedding photos had hung for 37 years. The lace curtains I'd sewn by hand after David was born had disappeared. My dresser, the one my husband had spent 3 weekends restoring because I couldn't afford a new one, had been shoved into the garage, scratched and covered with dust. Even the quilt my mother made before she passed away had been folded into a plastic storage bin marked "Donate." Charlie looked at me from his oversized bed, wagging his tail innocently. I couldn't even be angry with him. He was just a dog. He had no idea he was sleeping in the room where my husband had whispered, "Take care of the kids for me," only moments before he took his last breath. The betrayal wasn't his. It belonged to the people I'd spent my entire life loving. I quietly took out my phone and began recording. Every corner of the room. The dog bed, the toys, the bowls, the cardboard boxes labeled with my name. Then I walked into the living room and found another surprise. The realtor was sitting at my dining table. She looked up and smiled politely. "You must be David." "No," I replied calmly. "I'm Eleanor." Her smile disappeared. "Eleanor? The homeowner?" I nodded. The color drained from her face. She slowly closed the folder in front of her. I'm sorry. Your son told me you'd already agreed to move into assisted living and that he was handling the sale on your behalf." For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she quietly turned the folder around so I could see it. There was a listing for my home. Professional photographs, an asking price, open house dates, even a description that read, "Owner has already relocated, immediate possession available." I felt my knees weaken. They weren't waiting for me to decide. They had already decided for me. At that exact moment, I heard David's truck pull into the driveway. He walked through the front door laughing with his wife, but the laughter stopped the instant he saw me standing beside the realtor. His face turned white. "Mom," I held up the listing with trembling hands. "So," I asked quietly, "when exactly were you planning on telling me that I'd apparently already moved out?" David opened his mouth, but no words came out. For the first time in his life, he looked like a little boy who had been caught lying. "Mom, I can explain." I shook my head. "No, I think you've done enough explaining." His wife, Melissa, stepped forward with her arms crossed. "Eleanor, you're making this into something it isn't. We were only trying to help." "Help?" I repeated, unable to believe what I was hearing. "By giving my bedroom to your dog before I'd even packed my clothes?" "It's just a room," she said with a shrug. "No, it wasn't just a room. It was where I rocked David to sleep when he had nightmares. It was where my husband proposed to me after building the bed with his own hands. It was where I held his hand as he took his final breath. To them, it was square footage. To me, it was my entire life." The realtor quietly stood up and gathered her papers. "I think I'll leave." As she walked toward the door, I stopped her. "One question." She turned. "Did my son sign anything?" She hesitated. "He tried." David immediately interrupted. "Mom, listen." The realtor looked uncomfortable. "I refuse to proceed because the deed only has your name on it. I asked for your written authorization. That's why today's meeting was scheduled." She looked directly at David. "I assumed your mother would be here." Silence. David had never intended for me to attend. He had intended to sell my home behind my back. The moment the front door closed behind the realtor, I reached into my purse and pulled out my keys. David sighed with relief. "I knew you'd understand." I smiled for the first time that day. "I do understand." His shoulders relaxed, then I held out my hand. "Give me your house keys." "What?" "The spare key to my house." Melissa laughed. "We don't have to—" "I wasn't asking." David slowly reached into his pocket and handed me the key. Then I looked at Charlie's giant dog bed. I walked into my bedroom, picked it up with both hands, and carried it outside. Melissa gasped. "What are you doing?" I placed the bed in the back of David's pickup truck, along with every toy, every bowl, every blanket, and every bag of dog food they had moved into my room. Then I returned to the house, carried my mother's quilt back onto my bed, hung my wedding photograph where it belonged, and opened every window to let fresh air fill the room again. Finally, I turned to David. "You were right about one thing." He looked hopeful. "I do need to make some changes." His eyes lit up. "I knew you'd—" "I'll be changing my locks tomorrow morning." His smile disappeared. "And before you ask—" I held up my phone. I recorded everything. His face went pale. "The fake house listing, my bedroom, the dog room, the realtor's statement, the boxes marked donate." Melissa's confidence vanished instantly. I took one final look at my son. "I spent 35 years making this house a home. You only needed 3 weeks to make it feel like I was already dead." I walked them to the front door. Neither of them argued. Neither of them apologized. They simply left. A week later, David came back alone. He wasn't carrying excuses this time. He was carrying my wedding quilt. "I found it in the garage," he whispered. His eyes were red from crying. "I don't know what happened to me." I looked at him for a long time before answering. When people start seeing an inheritance instead of a parent, they stop seeing the parent altogether. He broke down. For months, he came every Saturday. Not to ask for forgiveness, not to ask for money, just to mow the lawn, fix the fence, and sit with me over a cup of tea. Trust didn't come back overnight. Some wounds never completely disappear. But little by little, he stopped acting like a man waiting for my house and started acting like my son again. Now, when people visit my home, they sometimes laugh because Charlie still runs straight into my bedroom. I let him. After all, none of this was ever his fault. He's welcome on my bed anytime. The people who forgot whose room it was had to earn the right to walk through that door again. If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more emotional stories about family, betrayal, forgiveness, and second chances. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you walked into your own bedroom and found it had been turned into someone else's before you had even moved out?